Please be seated, and I invite any children who are present to come join me. All over on this side today. So any of you guys like sports? What's your favorite sport? Soccer. What's yours? Racing? Cool. Anybody else? Sports fans? What do you like? Soccer. I like baseball. I'm no good at it, but I like to watch it. Baseball has something called spring training. It's going on right now, where the athletes come together before the big season starts, and they try to work on their skills and get back in shape. Other sports have similar things. I know soccer has training camps. The boys up in Sewanee who play soccer, they have their training camp in August before the school year starts, and part of it, the coach makes them run up the mountain to get their legs in shape. And people who do racing have special training, and hockey has training camp, football has training camp. All these sports have these times where they train, not because they're learning the sport for the first time. I mean, after all, those boys who were running up the mountain didn't just start doing that. They've been playing soccer for years. The baseball players at spring training, they've been doing this for years. But rather because everybody knows that if you really want to stay good, you have to go back and work on the basics again. Baseball players have to work on just making a little bitty thin stick hit a little bitty ball that's going really fast. Soccer players have to make sure that their legs are in shape and that they're ready that they know all the footwork patterns and they know what part of the field is theirs and all of that kind of stuff. Lent is like spring training for Christians. All of us have been doing this for a while, but we still need to come back together and go back to basics and work on practicing those things that carry us through living out our lives as Christians. It doesn't matter how good of a person you are. If you aren't working on a life of prayer, you're not going to do very well at sustaining yourself in ministry out in the world. And I don't care how much you're doing at praying in church, but if you're not also going out in the world and doing good, then your prayer life is going to be pretty dead too. There's those basic things that we all need to do. That's what Lent is about. So the next few weeks are going to seem a little weird sometimes. And over the weeks, I'll talk to you guys about some of the things that we do for this training. But I just want you all to remember that this is the time. This is the time for us to practice. Because Easter's coming. And after Easter, I'm going to need all of you guys to be able to go out into the world and help me share all this good news that we get to hear here. And if we're going to do that, then we've got to be in shape. So now's the time to get in shape and to be ready. Okay? Let's go get some stamps. On Ash Wednesday in my sermon, I set forth the proposition that Lent is about starting over. And we discussed how the imposition of ashes and the words that accompany them remind us that we are, in the very essence of our being, God's own beloved dust. We also established that human sin is a direct result of forgetting who and what we are. So, if sin comes about by forgetting who we are, and if what we are called to do in this season is to find our true identity and start over from that place, then what we need to do is remember. Now, I don't mean this word remember in the way it has commonly come to be used. This remembering isn't about recollecting some fact that has temporarily slipped from our minds. It's not about suddenly realizing that I was supposed to get a haircut last Thursday morning and in the busyness of the day I forgot about it. That's not what we're talking about. No, for our purposes, I want us to go back to what remembering originally meant. Putting things back together. Bringing things to wholeness. Restoring things to integrity. Time and forgetfulness and distraction and distortion separate reality. But remembering makes things whole. Remembering makes important things that happened long ago present right now. Remembering makes eternal truths live today. The pieces come back together, and even if it's only for a moment, all is as it ought to be. That's why Jesus begins his public ministry with time out in the wilderness. He goes there to remember who he is, to remember who God is, to remember the work of salvation and restoration that it is his calling to undertake. Satan's temptations are really a work of distraction. Satan hopes that Jesus can be prevented from remembering. Satan hopes to disrupt Jesus' integrity and thus somehow to keep Jesus from restoring the unity of humanity and indeed of the whole creation with God. But Jesus responds to Satan with integrity. He rejects Satan's attempts to turn him into something he is not and to separate him from his own nature, to separate him from God, to separate him from the work he has come to do on our behalf. In our Lenten journey, we're called to join Jesus in this act of remembering. We begin with that smudge of ashes, and we remember who we are and where we come from. We kneel and confess that we have fallen short of being people who live with integrity. But we can't stop there. Dust and ashes and confession are the beginning, but they are by no means the whole story. We must seek to join Jesus in the work of restoring creation to wholeness. It isn't enough to just momentarily recollect our origins or to notice that we aren't living up to our human potential and calling. We must then work to remember ourselves and our families and our society and our planet. There are some common disciplines that have been employed in our tradition to assist us in this work of remembering. On Ash Wednesday, we were invited to employ these disciplines, namely prayer and fasting and almsgiving, in the work of making a new start of our lives in Christ. If we take the invitation seriously, we gain some powerful tools in remembering who we are and in remembering the work God has given us to do. Chief among the disciplines of Lenten observance is a life of prayer. Now, I'm sure that all of us here already has some practice of saying prayers. But I'm not talking about saying prayers. I'm talking about being prayer. Prayer is more than words, more than a list of requests for God, more even than praising God. Prayer is being in relationship with God, being in the presence of God. Prayer is about learning to see and love the world in the same way that God does. In this season of Lent, we're called to strive ever harder to actually become prayer. We are called to live more and more fully in the presence of the God in whose image and likeness we are made. Now, saying prayers, either alone or with others, is supposed to help us become prayer. And in becoming prayer, we can remember who we are in relationship with God. Now, as we engage the discipline of prayer, we might find that there are things, even ordinarily good things, which keep us from living more fully into this life that is prayer. And that is where fasting comes in. Now, fasting is more than just going without food. Fasting is about putting ourselves into right relationship with everything in our lives that is not God. We human beings are prone to make idols out of just about anything. Food, games, sex, books, the internet, talking, anything. We can take these good things and make them more important than God in our lives. Fasting is a practice of doing without something for a time so that we can get back into a right relationship with it. In this season of Lent, we are called to determine the ways in which we have made idols out of otherwise good things and to restore our relationship with these things so that we will know that these things are not gods, but rather are tools with which we are called to serve God and God's people. Fasting creates space in our lives so that we can remember who we are in relationship with God's creation. Now, in the space left by our fasting, we then need to decide what will take up that space. In our effort to become prayer, we seek to be transformed in a way that takes that space and gives it over to God's service, which leads us to almsgiving. And just as fasting is more than going without food, almsgiving is more than simply giving money. At its heart, almsgiving is about training ourselves to give from whatever bounty we have to those who need to be blessed by those gifts. Almsgiving goes beyond our money to include our time and our talents and even our emotions. Just as fasting trains us not to put other things between God and ourselves, almsgiving trains us not to put other things between us and other people. In almsgiving, we remember who we are in relationship with God's people. Now, you might have noticed that none of these disciplines focuses directly on the self. I know that it's fashionable for us to be interested in self-help and self-improvement. Maybe even to think about Lenten disciplines as a Christian substitute for New Year's resolutions. But that's not the point of the Lenten season. Surely, putting our relationship with ourselves back into a position of wholeness is an important thing. But the paradox that faces us is that we cannot do that by focusing on ourselves. If we want to be in right relationship with ourselves, then we need to focus on remembering who we are in relationship with God and with others and with the whole of creation. Only then can we remember who we are in relationship with ourselves. We need the perspective that comes from living outside of ourselves so that we can then truly learn how to live with ourselves. God calls us in these days of Lent to remember who we are and to live into that remembrance. God calls us to wholeness and invites us to live with integrity, to live in unity with God and with one another and with creation, and yes, even with our own selves. In Jesus, God goes before us out into the wilderness and shows us there how to do the work to which we are called. Let us follow him and remember and work with him to bring all things to wholeness.